Hello, my name's John Doran. I write about music. I've got three very special guests to introduce, but before I do that, there's a couple of little housekeeping bits that I want to go through. The first is I wanted to say thanks so much to Hamish and the Elevator Sound crew for inviting me here. It's really exciting. Now that I've got into Modular, I don't have any money left, but I really appreciate being part of, at the periphery of a community of independent producers and creators and artists, and I think it's more important now than ever to support it's incredible how independent and non-corporate and non-mainstream the whole Modular thing is. So I appreciate that. The second is that the three guests have very graciously said that they'll do a Q&A at the end. And now, at this point in proceedings, I always like to remind people, men, that the Q in Q&A stands for question and not long rambling monologue that begins, well, this is more of a statement than a question. But yeah, I'm telling you now that we've got a lot of time. So if you want to know anything at the end, just be thinking about a question now, and we should have time to get round all of you. So this is called Modular Medicine, and we're kind of burying the lead a little bit, but we'll get round to what that is, that actually means in a second. First of all, I edit a music magazine called the Quietus, and the three people that we've got with us today are our core artists. To me, they need no introduction. I'm sure you feel exactly the same way. But going from stage left to right, we've got Nick Colk-Void, who is playing modular synth and electronics today. She has produced amazing solo records recently, like Booked Up Space on Migo. She's a member of the recently reactivated kind of live experimental techno group, Factory Floor. She was 1/3 of Carter Tutti Void, who released what is, for my money, the best live electronic record ever made, which is called Transverse. Next to her, we've got Adrian Utley, composer, improviser, musician and producer. I've been really enjoying listening to his recent work as a member of 137 with Seb Roachford, which is an improvised modern jazz band. But also he's been a sideman for Goldfrapp, Sparkle Horse, Marion Faithfull, and of course he's a founding member of one of my all-time favourite groups, Portishead. And on my right, we have Anthony Child, a DJ, producer, composer, a member of the ego-dissolving Transcendence Orchestra, one half of the cult European electronic duo British Murder Boys, who finally released their excellent debut album this year. And he's, of course, to people who like going out, jumping up and down in dark rooms, techno royalty, a founder of Birmingham's House of God, and to this day remains one of my favourite DJs doing the business on two decks. I wanted to lower us in gently by asking you all one by one how you got into either kind of synthesis or making electronic music. Tony?
So I think my first intro to that was messing about with tape recorders, really. It was about sound manipulation. I started doing that when I was pretty young, I don't know, 7, 8 years old or something like that. And I guess it was kind of like musique concrète, even though I didn't know that's what it was at the time. And but then I think as far as synthesis goes, I was really inspired by a video I saw of Charles Cohen, working with a booklet music easel, and at the time I was really sort of stuck in my creative process. I'd really gone into the box into like computer production, and I'm not really much of a programmer. I'm more of a sort of performer creator rather than a programmer. So I was like really stuck, and I saw this video of him playing with the booklet music easel, and I just thought, wow, that really looks like fun. And I realized kind of that's what was missing in my process, was the fun. And so that kind of sent me down another wormhole of the kind of booklet easel and the Eurorack stuff. And so that's the potted history.
What elements of you being very young in short trousers making music concrete, or kind of watching a video of like a booklet easel, what elements of you in those early stages would still be in your practice today?
I think being curious is like the thread that connects it all. Really, it's about being curious, experimenting, discovering, and playing. Really, are the things that connect the earliest experiments and what I still do.
I mean, I'm really curious to know what music concrete made by an 8-year-old sounds like. Was it just like bits of the Smurfs or Doctor Who? And what were you actually using as your source material?
Yeah, I didn't have much in the way of source instruments, so it was things like food mixers and drills. And just anything I could make a sound with, and just it started off with just a little tape recorder and removing the erase head, and then eventually I got hold of a reel-to-reel, and I heard about tape loops and just made those and that kind of thing, and then eventually saved up for a 4-track tape recorder and just made sound with whatever I could get my hands on. Really, it was like having to be inventive about using very little and very basic equipment.
Nick, what was your route into making electronic music?
Well, initially I was playing guitar, so electric guitar, and I was really fascinated by feedback extended technique guitar rather than traditional playing that was kind of, which would have been the approach I started with, copying pop records or whatever I really adored. And then I started to look into other artists like Tony Conrad and Glenn Branca, and having this more experimental visual approach to noise making. Then, when I started to play within bands like Factory Floor and Car to Void, realizing that the guitar sound, if I cut it short at the end or spliced it or resampled the drone, it would take up this space that I kind of was curious to investigate more. So I started using sequences with the guitar drones, which led on to getting my first synth, which was the B16 that was adapted to be able to put my guitar through. And it just seemed to go on from there. It was like a natural progression of curious and, Tony says, like playfulness. And then eventually I made a leap to doing modular synthesis when I took on that duty in Factory Floor when Dominic left. And it seemed to give me the answers that I was looking for, because I could then incorporate many other instruments that were more about sound and, as opposed to like being recognizable as a traditional instrument, which was what I was fighting against most of the time.
I know from the last few times I've talked to you that you're very much like a proselytizer, like an evangelist for modular synthesis. And I think you described it to me once as just like a practicality thing. You know, you can travel with a modular synth or whatever. But what was your specific route into modular?
Well, because I've been predominantly a live performer since age of 16, it just seems to be like the pragmatic approach to using tools was a real significant factor of how the sound my sound part of a band or my own sound would develop. So obviously the idea and the notion of Eurorack was that you can get such a variant of sound in one box. So that really appealed to me. And then it was like the actual sort of getting the actual pieces together, the cables, the packing really helped me with my anxieties that I faced from touring and like repetitive playing. It kind of cleared my mind going through that whole process, which I found a lot more hands-on and easier to manage as opposed to taking a guitar with bows and sticks, you know, and just like it just seemed to sort of turn into something like my own. I owned my own identity through these tools, which are predominantly your own, you know, because with the Eurorack you make your own canvas to work from.
Adrian, what was your route into kind of either electronic music or synthesis in specifically?
Yeah, I think it's well, I'm a lot older than all of you, so I think my influences are probably going to be when I was a kid. You know, I do definitely remember hearing Doctor Who for the first time around my granny's house when the first or second episode, and that otherworldly kind of sound, and was very prevalent as well when I was a kid. It was on like all sorts of TV programs, and radio stings were like electronic, concrete stuff. So it kind of went into my head, but I never ever thought I never thought I'll get a tape player and just chop tape up. I'm really envious of all that. I think it was more frugal when I was a kid. You couldn't get hold of this stuff, at least I couldn't. So I come from a village in Northamptonshire, and there wasn't really much I could get. So, you know, and I listened to, like, the Beatles were really big, like Abbey Road, all the Moog synths that were on that, later Tangerine Dream. I couldn't figure any of it out, and I am a guitar player. Well, I was a guitar player back then, and to cross over into synthesizer world was a really big step, like in the mid-70s. I didn't know anyone who had a synthesizer, you know, so but I had a guitar and a wah-wah pedal, and that was like a filter on a synthesizer. And one of my huge heroes and influences is Jimi Hendrix. Don't play like him, but Star Spangled Banner has always been one massive, beautiful piece of music for me, and that altered way of playing guitar has always stuck with me. So, and then, you know, later on I managed to get some synths, and then on it went. And similarly, like all of us, I am curious, and every day is a school day, so it always develops. And now I'm in my late 60s, I still find things out all the time, you know, through all the synthesizers and conventional synthesizers. And probably for the last 30 years, I've been playing altered technique on the guitar, playing with various tools and things. And like you, I'm seriously into Branca and early Sonic Youth, and all those things were massive influences on me, you know, outside of our band Portishead, really. And maybe I brought some of that into that, I really don't know.
So before we get into the kind of main reason why we're here today, I thought it'd be really illuminating to talk to the three guests about a real milestone kind of electronic, like a piece of electronic music. It's what I really like to, it's my comfort zone, is talking about really kind of iconic pieces of music. We were talking just earlier, your piece of music is Time Machines by Coil. We were talking earlier about the kind of psychological impact of watching Drew play this kind of synthesizer music at full pelt can actually have on you. What was your kind of introduction to Time Machines, and what does it mean to you?
I think I'm pretty. So I chose Time Machines, but I guess I was sort of choosing Coil as artists, really. And I think it's safe to say that they're really kind of at the centre of my musical universe, really. And I think I'm pretty sure I followed them since about 1986 or something like that. I just sort of came across their music and was really struck by it, and everything kind of opened up from there, really. But I don't know, Time Machines is a really powerful work from them, and I really remember at the time how different it sounded to other. I was aware of what you could call ambient music at the time, but it was so different from this. How I see this Brian Eno idea of definition of ambient being something that you could just as easily pay attention to or ignore. But Time Machines was something that demanded my attention, and had such a kind of visceral psychological effect. I've always been fascinated by music having a strong effect on you physically or psychologically, and to me that really was like a new level of that when I heard that music.
So I'm pretty sure that everyone here knows who Coil are, like a post-throbbing gristle, industrial, for want of a better word, psychedelic electronic group with the two core members of Peter Christopherson and John Balance. But they'd already been through a couple of very clearly delineated stages before this, and I believe that around about 1998 they were kind of suffering the great come down that a lot of people were kind of suffering after they'd immersed themselves very enthusiastically into ecstasy and rave culture. And the synthesizer player Drew came to them with 4 tracks, which were demos, which formed the basis of this incredible record. And as I understand it, each track is meant to be listened to while under the influence of a different psychedelic drug. I don't know about that, but what I do know is just listening to it straight is insanely psychedelic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, that's something that really that always fascinated me from a really early age with electronic music, about how if I listen to a certain piece really loud in a dark room, how that would like change my consciousness, basically. And I'm still fascinated by that.
So one of the really interesting things that I've listened to all of this music, well, with no disrespect to Adrian, I didn't listen to all 14 hours of the Eliane Radigue box set, but I listened to 4, which I think is a good innings. But what I noticed about all of them, and I thought it was really interesting to talk about these records here, that if you're a synthesizer player and you ever think, oh, my patches need more animation, there's not enough going on, there's not enough modulation going on, with Time Machines, Eliane Radigue, Peter Rieberg, these are all pieces of music where arguably not that much happens, right? So do you want to tell us a bit about Eliane Radigue and Oeuvre electronic, or as we say in Wiltshire, electronic works?
Yeah, well, I sort of came late to that, but and I certainly don't know all of her work. I was just, when I first heard it, because I'm interested in synthesizers and what happens when oscillators get together, and beat frequencies and frequency modulation is massively interesting to me. And sometimes you're in a kind of isolated space with that. It's not a lot of, at a place like this you can talk about it, but generally you can't. And it's kind of, so when I first heard her, and I'm in no way an expert, it's just one of many, many, many things I listen to, there's a kind of stillness about it that it's not like you can ignore it. I'm not really into that. But it kind of reset my brain in a kind of way, in the way that Bach resets my brain. Those beautiful lines that somehow your brain can totally deal with and reset and make everything okay again when it's chaotic. I'm just making a record, and the sleeve of it is a massive scribbled load of nonsense, like chaotic, tangled string that I drew years ago. And that's generally what goes on in my head most of the time. And so these kind of things make it not like that for a bit. And when I make music myself, other than the many things that I do, and I've got interest in many, many things, drone music, still music, and the tiniest increments of quarter tones and beyond really sort me out. So I felt that, and as far as I know, she has a stopwatch in one of the videos I saw of her making music with her beautiful big charts and her amazing 2500 ARP 2500 synth, that also she hasn't altered or modified, and she's had it forever, so I think from the 70s onwards, and doesn't use anything else, which I think is absolutely amazing. It's like having a beautiful violin, like a Stradivarius, or anything that you've had for your whole life. And I have many friends who have instruments that they haven't changed. There's a relationship with it that she has that I'm massively envious of. And she makes these beautiful pieces of music and times herself so it doesn't go on forever and ever. Unlike, who is he from New York? The dude you can't record. My mind's gone.
Lamont Young.
Lamont Young, exactly, yeah. It's amazing music from what I've heard of it. So that was it really with her. And there are many. I was thinking as I was arriving here, the thing about stress levels and mental health is that I cannot name all the people. I feel under stress to try and name all the people that are in my mind that influence me, that I love, that I knew, that people introduced me to. There's a franticness at the moment in the world with, internet. We can find out anything immediately, and actually, I don't want to. I just want to listen to that for a bit.
Well, maybe there's actually like a strategy for coping with what you're talking about by looking at Eliane Rodriguez. She bought the ARP 2500 with all of the money she had and had to take it back on a steamship to Paris with her, and she opted in 1970, which was really clear-sighted, to leave the keyboard in New York. So she was working right from the beginning just with a modular system. But it feels to me like she's never been part of a scene. No. It's her synth is in the corner of the apartment where she lives, and she is disconnected from everything, and that's allowed her the space to make this incredible music, which, as you say, is not ambient. It demands to be listened to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of it, so it's going to forever. You're going to be surprised by more and more things. Sometimes she does something that has a really high tone in it that I just think I can't listen to that. It's too much. I wish she hadn't done that, but that's what she's doing.
Yeah, some of it sets off my tinnitus more than my dog, which is saying something.
Yeah.
Nick, you were going to tell us about Peter, which is Peter Rayberg, and the album Get Down.
Yeah, so when you asked me to choose a record, for records, it's the connection with the artist as much as what it sounds. And, obviously, I knew Get Down by Peter Rayberg before I actually met him. And so I think my problem growing up musically was that I felt trapped within playing within the boundaries of traditional guitar music, and then I moved on to noise. And noise to me is kind of a meditative release understanding of myself, and being in the present moment. And this is why I'm very much into improvising. So when I came across Peter's record, Get Down, I mean, I might have to explain because it's quite a noise record as opposed to a drone record, but it starts with "This is not music" or something. The first track, right? So even in the titles, it has a sense of humor and irony, and so straight away. It started me to realize that music isn't all seriousness. It's not everything in your life. It doesn't have to be like that, because at that point I was just like totally consumed by music. And to let go and to make noise and to play sound that in your own way, in your own language. And that record really taught me that. And that kind of physical approach that I can hear through the tracks using the modular synthesizer and also computer, because he would like completely rewire the inners of a computer to make it noise, was the type of creative approach that really appealed to me. It wasn't like, I guess it was a punk approach, but it was just something that felt like a release. So that's why, I can listen to this record full blast in the morning as opposed to, like something that's easy to listen to. It actually gives me some sense of calm.
So we want to come now to what the idea of modular medicine is. And this is a bit of a thought experiment. And I'm really curious to know that how many, in about 10 or 15 minutes time, how many people here actually agree with me. And when Hamish asked me to do this, I said to him, well, look, I'm probably like the least qualified person at this festival to talk about modular synths. But the way I got into it was fairly unique, I think. In 2016, I was run over by a van. I nearly died, and I lost my memory for a while, and I ended up with what's called a traumatic brain injury. When I received the compensation for this, at the same time, the first lockdown for COVID had started, and I just realised that I had long COVID and developed serious lung complications, and the money from the car accident came in, and I bought my first piece of modular synthesizer gear. So for me, the idea of recovery, wellness, spiritual, physical, psychological well-being, and creating synthesizer music are all wrapped in together. Now, I'm not saying that all of our guests have had the same experience of me, but I think they all have different ideas on how making electronic music or making music full stop has a positive effect on either their spiritual being, their physical being, or their mental being. And I guess I'll go to you first, Tony, and ask, I sent you a bit of a word salad email, and thankfully you agreed to do it. And what did you think about my proposition?
I've definitely recognised that my sound practice is a real sort of mental sanctuary, but I don't know. It's a little difficult to explain, but I remember having really vividly having this really intense experience when I was really young, and I remember lying in bed, and I actually grew up in a village outside Northampton as well, Kislingbury. Don't know it. Okay. But the thing was that falling asleep at night, I could hear this hum of the M1 motorway, which goes kind of nearby, and I really believe that falling asleep in that sort of semi-conscious state and hearing that drone, it created such a really intense. I can only describe it as the feeling of infinity. I felt like I was being stretched across the whole length of the universe or something, and it was a really bizarre and intense, but not at all just fascinating, not frightening, but I really felt like I was experiencing infinity. That's the only way I can describe it, and that's to me, that's what I'm searching for in feedback or drone or tones. And so, again, it's difficult to describe, but it's almost like the idea of infinity, or I don't know, you could almost call it God or consciousness or something like that. So it's really connecting into that, and there's something very deep and special about completely losing your ego and yourself into. I don't really have the words for it.
I think that's amazing. I think you've described it really, really well. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I know from talking to you that you take yoga very seriously. We were talking earlier about the idea of like a garden having many paths through it, which all come to the same point at the end. And I've been thinking a lot recently, after kind of writing a great deal about Aphex Twin's Selected Ambient Works too, about how the LSD experience, or just the completely straight but dancing for 7 hours at a rave, and the devoted practice of yoga can all lead to either a full or partial dissolution of the ego. And I was wondering, your very kind of youthful and quite like a really exciting sounding idea of experiencing infinity through the noise of a motorway.
The M1 motorway.
Yeah. Does that link in your head to what you get from yoga now?
Yeah, I think something really significant to me. So, like you say, I've practiced yoga quite seriously for a long time, and but what really struck me is my teacher actually pointed out to me that sound is my primary spiritual practice, and I'd never, up until the point she said that, I hadn't thought of it in that way. And when she said it, it was like, wow, that's really actually really obvious to me, that it is. I can look at it as being a spiritual practice, but practice is the key word about this ongoing process of always learning, as you were saying, discovering. It's not something that you're like, okay, I've done it now. It's that's the beautiful thing, that it's an ongoing process.
Do you delineate between different strands of practice, in as much as like one day you might be making you might be working with Carl on a British Murder Boys record, or you might be making techno for a commission, or you might be practicing a live performance? Is there a space where you just make music to self-hypnotize or meditate or to change your brain?
I think that what I've realized, I think I always initially think that all these different projects are different, but over time I come to realize that they're underneath the surface, they all sort of connect in some way, and they all actually feed into each other as well. I was talking back, in the green room with Nick, about how we get quite frustrated that we actually don't spend enough time. We spend so much time preparing for gigs and working to deadlines and stuff. It's like we want to spend more time just purely playing, and that's really where the good stuff comes from.
Nick, can I ask you the same, really vaporous, and I really apologise, it's such a kind of ill-defined concept, but is there any way in which your kind of practice making electronic music kind of helps you, either with kind of like mental processes, or with kind of like physical healing, or kind of spiritual well-being?
Like Tony, I've got so many different projects on the go. Like with CTV and Factory Floor, I think talking about the signal, like square wave is my favorite. To develop into arpeggiator, and working with other people is probably my tonic of the right people of feeling some sort of mental well-being, to feed off that energy and that unison of like being able to connect through synthesis, electronic music, beats. It does send me into some sort of transient state, playing live on stage when there's a repetitive moment, and then I can't really explain, but that is probably where I'm the most happiest and feel more one with myself. So I guess that's a form of meditation. I've never been a meditator, but then you've got the mantra, you've got the repetitive notion, and I think that kind of helps me keep solid feet on the floor and experience that. If I try and do that up by myself, my brain is too all over the place. I can't take that time out. So I can't make music to please myself. I think right from the start of making music was always about connecting and or having a conversation with an audience. So I've never really made music for self-indulgent, and I really wish I could, So I think once I start working with other people, that's when that becomes more, I become more into that state of thinking.
So, Adrian, I think when we first talked about this, I was saying to you that when getting after getting COVID, I developed really bad asthma out of nowhere overnight, and I think Steve, who's in the audience, his partner Katie, put me in touch with a frontline medical specialist who suggested I look into this thing called resonant breathing, and you breathe in for 5.5 seconds and you breathe out for 5.5 seconds, and eventually, and you do it, you can get an app on your phone and it plays one tone for breathing in, another tone for breathing out. And in the instructions, the thing that really just set off an explosion in my mind was it said, think of your breath as a single event, so as a sine wave. You might think, breath in, breath out as discrete actions, but as soon as I start thinking of this one thing like a wave, it suddenly made me realise, for me, the deep connection between a meditative state and the absolute building blocks of synthesis. You obviously, we've talked a lot about how really you are into kind of making drone music with synthesizers. What are the kind of, if any, meditative aspects of it for you?
Well, I've never meditated in my life, other than when I was 14, I started to learn guitar in a kind of conventional way, and I've always played in a conventional way as well as. Like my mum would always say to me, why don't you ever play the guitar properly, Adrian? Which is, has been my remit for my life. But I played jazz for a very long time and was really into John Coltrane. That's spiritual to me. Coltrane's music, I didn't get it, first of all. And to me, that is meditative. It's like Hari Prasad, the flute player. These things are really, really important to me. When I was touring with Portishead, we did a year tour around the world and probably back to America 3 times. And in Australia, I bought a record by Hari Prasad, the Indian flute player, and that was my salvation with Bach music as well. So I understand that kind of meditative state through music. And what I was going to say is I learned guitar when I was very young. For me, I've never done anything but make music from when I was left art school when I was 19 till now when I'm 67. That's all I've ever done. And for me, playing the guitar still and always has been, apart from any of the music I've made with other people or anything, has always been a salvation for me. It's always been a safe place that I can go into where it is a meditative state, I think. I've never really been into drugs, so I've never had that experience of taking LSD. I've always been too frightened about all of that stuff. I've never taken ecstasy. I've never taken any of these drugs. So those states, but I think I understand them. I think I do through some of the music I've made in my life, I'm rambling on. I can't. Where are we going?
Well, no, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, like, up until very recently, we've assumed that these things are somehow linked, but there's been a lot of incredible research done in London within the last 4 years into a thing called the default mode network. And the default mode network is the thing that fires up as we daydream, but also as we trip, but also, as it turns out, as we meditate. And due to CAT scans of the human brain on people taking acid and meditating, they're very, very similar states. It's been proved.
Right.
I just wanted to warn everyone, we're getting very close to asking questions, so this is your 5-minute warning. Well, you said something really interesting, which I wanted to pick back up again. If it's not too kind of, it's a pretty bold question, but I agree with you that, like, I reject utterly what Steven Pinker, the atrocious kind of pop psychologist, said about music. He called it auditory cheesecake. What a fucking fool. You know, like somehow this special thing that unites all of us is a bit of cake that you have at the end of the day as a treat. What an idiot. You know, so like for me, yeah, it does have an analog religious meaning to me. It both is how I think about time, but also it's how I think about my place in the universe. I don't know, feel free to say no, but what, you know, in very fundamental terms, like what is the foundational aspect of music in your life? Yeah.
It's one of the most important things that that's ever happened to me. It's fundamental to everything about my life, always making music or listening to music. I'm sure we're all. I can't imagine cake. That's not, it's absolutely part of my DNA. It's, you know, it's forever shifting, but it's really important, obviously, you know. I never want to do anything else. I will die making music, I hope, you know.
Okay.
I think one thing we all have is that we all grew up in isolated places, you know. And I think music to ourselves gives us an identity. And so, yeah, music to me is basically me, my language, you see. So it's my way of communicating, or, you know, sort of expressing what I can give out, I suppose, and take in, you know. So I've not taken drugs either, but lately it's got onto the pragmatic aspect of music, which through Modular and Eurorack synthesis is just the whole kind of like how technically you have to go in unison with that, and that free thinking of, you know, being presented with a sound and what you can do with that sound in that very moment, you know, which is exciting. You know, it's not being heard before, and that's something that I couldn't get from any other traditional instrument playing. So, yeah.
So there we have it. On one hand, a sacrament, a religion, a way of considering time, and on the other hand, a piece of Battenberg. Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone, we literally can't see any of you, honestly, even dimmed, the lights are blinding, but I believe there's a radio mic out there. If you've got a question, just speak it into the mic, and like if you want to know something from one person in particular, make sure you say who that is. I've got no idea if this is happening or not. There's somebody with a hand up over there. I can just. It's like that scene at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they all come off the ship at the end. I was just like, what?
It's directed at Tony. You say you've practiced yoga for many years. Have you ever tried Tai Chi as a related practice? Because I've done that for many years myself, and I found that as a process, it requires so much concentration, your brain is unable to focus on anything else. And it's also rhythmic and cyclical. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just largely that I never sort of came into contact with it. It's definitely something that has sort of looked interesting to me, but it's often the case of like what you come into contact with in your life. So I guess I would give it a go if I had a chance to sort of learn with a good teacher. I just happened to come into contact with yoga and that, and I was really fortunate to come across a really good teacher, and it's a lot to do with kind of the way that life lines up, really. But yeah, I guess like we were saying about this idea of many routes up the same mountain. It's there are many ways to kind of reach the same kind of destination. So yeah, for sure, it's whatever works for you. But it's just really good having some sort of practice. I think is really beneficial and healthy.
Anyone else? There's a couple of hands up over there.
Cheers. So in that context, I'll save you the monologue that precedes this. Do you think it's self-help? It's about finding your own bit of this that works for you, rather than medicine where you actually do it for somebody else within your own context?
I'm sorry, it's so quiet in here. I think he was saying, would we see music in this context as a form of self-help, as in, you taking autonomy and helping yourself, rather than like taking medicine, which is somebody doing something, passive or active. For what it's worth, I agree with you entirely. I'm not some woo idiot who thinks, oh, you should never take medicine because it's chemicals or whatever. But why not be holistic? Like I'm taking, because I'm an old man, I'm taking ibuprofen for a strained muscle at the moment. But I'm also gonna do stuff that helps me with my bipolar condition, which is making music.
Well, I think I agree with you actually. But for me, I've had a lifetime of not dealing with issues, and some of those have helped me with my moving forward with the music I do. A kind of obsessional, single-minded. I'm doing this to the detriment of other things. And I've never really been into medicine. I think, every day is a school day. I said that before. And about learning about, you can get help outside. And probably for me, I probably might need that. But for me, music has given me everything I've needed my whole life, pretty much.
I hope that answers your question. There was somebody with a hand up on the same row, I believe. Or just behind you, actually, if you want to pass the mic back.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I was wondering how your brain injury changed your relationship with music, if at all.
Oh, my God. Right, so, honestly, it's it was the craziest thing. It wasn't even bad at first. It was so, I didn't know what was going on. I remember, so when I got run over, they go through this checklist of questions, like, who's the Prime Minister, what day is it? And this guy, he was like, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 21. And he was like laughing. I was like, what are you laughing at? I was like, then it came back to me, oh God, I'm 45 or whatever, however old I was. It was so crushing, actually, suddenly gaining 24 years. And this went on for weeks. But what I remember really clearly is my girlfriend picking me up from Homerton Hospital, and I was just away with the furries. My head felt like it was full of honeycomb, weirdly enough. And she took me to my favourite fish and chip restaurant, and I felt on top of the world. It was so weird. I couldn't barely remember anything. And this music came on and it sounded amazing. And I was clicking my fingers and fuck, this is fucking awesome. And she was looking at me like, have you lost your mind. What are you doing? And I was like, why? What are you talking about? She goes, this is the Libertines. And I was like, oh, fucking hell, it really must be serious then. Like, yeah. And then, honestly, there was some, like, Shine indie compilation, and the next track was by Muse, and I was like, oh, God, this sounds amazing as well. Oh, fuck, I'm fucked. What am I going to do? Like, I'm going to have to change the Quietus overnight into this, really awful music.com. But it was really beneficial, actually. It really, really made me think very critically about subjective and objective opinions. I didn't have much truck with the idea of stuff being objectively awful beforehand, but I have even less of that now. And whereas, like, beforehand, I kind of knew instinctively that there was no such thing as a bad genre of music at all, I hold it as a very, very serious thing now. That if there's a genre of music you don't like, you just haven't explored it deeply enough. So, yeah, it did change my it did change my relationship to music in kind of philosophical terms, I think. Has anyone else got any questions? Down at the front.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, that's really loud, sorry. I was wondering, along the lines of all of your music careers, when it comes to exploring new or different parts of music, is there anything that is pivotal in your practice now when it comes to exploring these different things that you do differently than you would have to begin with?
So I think the gist of it is like, is there anything remarkably different in your practice right now to when you first started making music? So maybe what's the real novel development in the way you think about or make music, recently?
Okay. I think that the main thing, the factor that informs my change of music and learning is playing live and having these different opportunities to present using, cello players or, experimenting with different kind of collaborations that I wouldn't dare to do before. And that's the great unique thing about the Eurorack setup, is that it's totally adaptable to move in these different areas of music. So I think that's the actual pragmatic way of changing your setup and interpreting a new sound, like bringing in a new sound, bringing in a new module, is probably something that's made me change, my course, as opposed to like thinking ahead in my brain how it would sound. This way, it's kind of like it's presenting it to me, and how do I deal with that, and what do I do with it, and what choices I make.
I think for me, what my discovery that really excites me is changing my thought of tonality and conventional tonality. I mean, quarter tones have always been in our music, from blues, from many things, but to actually understand that these notes in between are really, really important. And I know that they're there because if you play guitar, you use quarter tones and things for expression. But I think that was big, and to retune my guitar to different, so I didn't just sound, even if dropping the pitch of it by a tone makes it, and have conventional tuning as such, but a tone lower, is exciting. And then really changing the tuning of a guitar and having other guitars that are strung differently with quarter tones. All of this I've been doing over the last 10 years. And also exploring different time signatures, not just 3 or 4, but having 7, 11, 5, not in a clever dick way, but just breaking that kind of cycle of, for me, predictability, if you like. So I suppose it's trying to find more unpredictable things that kind of move you on into another world.
I really enjoy exploring different processes to make and perform music, and I've kind of lost count of the amount of times where I'm developing something more and more and more, and then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I've actually come back around to the way that I was doing it, 20 years ago or something like that. So it's this kind of cosmic joke that keeps happening, where I think I'm going further and further out, and actually I find myself right back at the beginning again, but I have a different perspective on it. And that's my very vague, esoteric answer to the question.
I don't want to keep anyone from seeing all the other awesome things that are on today, but I think we can have one or two more, and afterwards I'm sure we're all around and fairly approachable to people to come up to us and ask us stuff at the bar or whatever. But if there's one or two more questions, there's someone at the front with the hand up.
Thank you. Is there anything specifically about modular, about the interface, or about patching that makes it more likely to create this kind of altered states or a kind of healing effect that you're talking about, compared to, say, working with a DAW or a keyboard synth or something like that? What's the difference?
Well, I know you're not asking me, but I'm going to jump in and say anyway that I had a gap from between say 1979, when I played in a kind of a colliery-style marching brass band, to not owning an instrument until Modular a few years ago. And for me, sitting in my shed at night time when all this stuff's fired up, and you make some music and it's fucking rubbish, but then 20 minutes later it's not that bad. And then 20 minutes after that, you're like, actually, this is fucking sick. You know what I mean? But so there's a real tactility of how it looks, which definitely for me also hits this incredible Delia Derbyshire, Doctor Who, Blake Seven spot in my brain. It looks futuristic, right? It looks how I imagined the future when I was a kid. There's something about the tactility and the hands-onness of if you can modulate a cut, all the jokes about modular are all the jokes about modular are all about the same thing. It's about, you're not playing, all you're doing is tweaking a cut-off filter, but that's where some of the real psychedelic potential is, isn't it? You know what I mean? So there's that. I can tell you from experience that you can't tweak the cut-off resonance of a trombone. That's what I know for sure, right? But yeah, so that would be but also the kind of durational aspect of but also it is a statistical. Statistically, you can do an infinite number of things with a modular setup, which there's something to be said for that, right? Does anyone have any, it was obviously I'm not a musician. Do any of the musicians have an aspect on this?
I think it's really interesting that modular, and without a keyboard or whatever interface you have, I think that's an interesting thing that's happening at the moment, and actually is massively developing with various interfaces, keyboards, things, way of playing. I think for years we've been stuck, with a keyboard that really didn't, it was diatonic, chromatic, hard to move from that. And I think what modular brings is a kind of new tonality, and as well as a massive new sonic palette, which is ever evolving. And as you know more and as you buy more modules, it's also kind of power to the people. You didn't have to have had your piano lessons and learn your harmony and your counterpoint. You don't need it. You can just make music. It's power to us all. It relieved me from all the training I've made myself have all over the years. It got rid of all that. I'm glad I had it, but it means I don't have to deal with that anymore.
Okay, I guess you could start with a B flat, just the resonance of the earth is kind of we should tune into B flat. But then, as soon as I make noise, as soon as the volume kicks in, and that's kind of where I feel I get into that kind of transient state.
I think I've always seen these machines as tools, as like a means to an end, and I always get really wary when people get so obsessed, and I think that's like a danger with modular gear. So to be honest, a lot of the time when people talk to me about modular, they actually know way more about it than I do. But I don't know. I mean, I definitely recognize that it's been really good in terms of opening up the idea of sound experimentation to like a wider audience of people and stuff like that. But I don't know. I'm always looking at what I can do with that tool rather than being obsessed with the tool itself, and that's the thing that I'm wary about. That I'm wary about. And when I first got into modular stuff, I quickly saw that side of it, and that it kind of put me off a bit, to be honest. But you know, I'm really interested in interesting instruments, interesting tools to be creative with. That's like the highest aim of it for me, not the tool in itself.
Can I just interject there? I watched that documentary, I Dream of Wires, which I felt was like 3 days too short, actually, because really it is a massive subject. And there was one guy in there, if I remember rightly, who didn't make music for anybody to hear ever, and he had a room with this immaculate modular that he was always adding to, and that was his space to go to and enjoy having the tool, and it was about collecting the pieces and then making music entirely for himself, and nobody else would ever hear it. And I think that's a really valid, that is another power to the people. You know, it's not like you've just got a cello and now you've got to be able to play Bach on it. I think it removes all of that, and that you don't need to put it out in the world. I mean, for us, we do, I think, but I really enjoy the fact that it has actually liberated a lot of people, even if they only collect the bits. It's a bit like collecting cards or whatever. You know, there's that aspect to it, and I think that's kind of valid. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Enjoy it in however you know, whatever you get enjoyment and value and.
But it is a trap, like you said. It is. I try to resist it all the time. To go, oh my God, I need that. No, I don't actually. If I can't, I'm surrounded by all this equipment, and actually, I've got enough. I don't need any more. Yeah,
it's with all of these things that can help us. I think the same thing that can help you can just as easily become a trap. So it's trying to be aware of these things becoming traps.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to quickly move the subject on so we don't have to address how I've, like, after giving up drinking 16 years, I've just replaced it with one addiction after another, and the latest one is I want to thank you all for coming and for being such a great audience, and say thanks to our 3 guests.